Hello and welcome to this video where I'm going to show you how I made these entrenchments. They're generally for World War II, but they can stretch all the way back really to the Boer War, most 20th century conflicts, and it's a pretty simple technique, but I'm going to show you how I did it in this video. So the first thing to say is I'll put the list of all the materials in the description below, but I built them basically out of mounting board. This is cardboard which has a foam centre. This is 1 centimetre deep. I got it from Amazon, I think, and I got quite a few sheets in A4. This is just some offcuts that I've got left over, so this is why I wanted to use it. And what I first of all did was very roughly measure out the bases of the figures that I wanted to sit in the trenches. As you can see here, these Soviets are on quite a large bench, and I just drew around them with a permanent marker here, just to mark on the mounting board itself exactly how big I wanted to make those cuts. This can be very rough and ready, because each of these wants to be pretty individual. You don't want them particularly uniform anyway. Once you have your basic shape, you can then just go on to start cutting them out. Use a sharp knife for this. Craft knife will do, but make sure it is sharp, because otherwise you'll get tears in the paper and the card. And then just simply cut out all the little marks that you made already on there. You're almost carving through the foam here, so I was just cutting off these corners just to make it a little bit more rounded, and then just kept cutting out that centre part. If you do make larger trenches, you can actually use that centre part to make even smaller trenches, so you're wasting less and less material as you go along. And once you have your basic shape, you can then start to actually cut away at the foam itself, just to give it a bit more of a shape of a trench. So what I'm doing here is I'm using the knife at an angle just to cut into that foam and to carve it so it looks like a parapet at the front. Now you want this bit to be relatively as flat as you can get it, really, so it wants to be quite a long, flat slope up the front of it. The interior of the trench doesn't have to be so flat, but you can carve that out as well a little bit if you want. And then what I've done is just rounded off some of those corners as well. Also just ensure that the sides have got a bit of a slope to them as well, to round off the shape of the trench itself. I also carved away the top of the card as well on the trench, but you can see it's starting to take shape already. You could actually cut these out of insulation foam or any other kind of foam that you've got. I just had these spare, so I thought I'd use them, and they are quite nice because I know how high they are, and they're for my 15mm figures, so they're perfect size really for the figures. So then it was just a case of just clearing off the last little bits of the cardboard around the bottom and just neatening up the shape of your trench, and you're pretty much there with the actual carving of it. And it was just a case again of just making sure that the figures that you're making your trenches for fit. These are the largest bases that I have, the Flames of War size bases, and also the Russian ones you can see there. The next stage was then to texture the trenches themselves. I used the texture paste by Vallejo. I'm sorry I didn't actually film that, but that's how they look when they're done. You could do this with PVA and sand and then some brown paint. And I went back just to add a little bit of depth to the texture itself. This is Army Painter's strong tone shade, which I just liberally added all over the trenches when they were nice and dry, all over that paste, and just make sure you get into all those nooks and crannies. One thing to do is just to make sure that whichever texture you use, if it's paste or if it's PVA and PVA and sand, ensure that you completely cover the foam, because if you're using any sprays like I do later on, it can actually melt some of that foam itself. Just something to keep in mind. Once your shade has dried, it's just a case of going back, using some khaki and dry brushing over the top just to bring out the lumps and bumps and all that texture. Very simple. Dry brushing is a very simple technique. You just load up your paint onto your brush, wipe off as much as you can, and then literally rub it over the top of the texture, and it just clings to the top and misses out the recesses. Nice and easy, and it looks pretty good when it's finished. Now we've got to create the sandbags, and I do this with green stuff. You can buy this anywhere, Amazon, eBay, even Games Workshop I think produce this stuff. It's a 2-part putty, which when it dries rock hard, but you do have to mix it, and it is incredibly hard to mix, but persevere because it's worth it. You will then eventually end up with a lump of green stuff, as the name suggests. I then break it into smaller parts and roll it out into a long sausage that's going to fit around the top of your trench. This is the sandbag making method. It's very simple, very easy, and you can make these as big or as small as you want. As I say, these are for 15mm, but there's no reason why you couldn't increase the size of this sausage that you're rolling out and turn them into 28mm, or even do it even smaller and go down, as far down as 6mm, if you've got the good eyesight for it. And once you have your little sausage of green stuff, gently press it onto the top of your trench, around the top or wherever you want your sandbags to go. So you've got a little line of it like that. And then press it down with your thumb or finger just to flatten it a bit, just to make it, again, to the height that you want the sandbags. Remember, these things are filled differently by different people. I've wanted these to go on in a bit of a rush, or look like they've just been put together pretty quickly, so there's no uniformity to them really. And then I take a sharp knife and score out marks where the individual bags are going to go. Use a clean knife for this, a nice clean blade if you can, otherwise it will stick to the green stuff. Work your way around the top first of all. You can cut all the way through if you want, but you then possibly might damage the trench yourself. So the way I do it is I just work my way around the top and just ensure you've got the little marks like that, and then I will go back and do the sides and also the front as well, just to that also actually helps to blend it into the top of the trench, so it looks like it's actually been part of the defences as well. So this is probably the hardest part of the job, just because you've got to really take a little bit of time and a bit of care just to make sure that those knife marks are in the right place on the front and the back, otherwise it's going to look a bit strange. And as I say, these sandbags can be any size you want them to be. These are for 15mm, so they're about the right size. They will be piled up. Also, soldiers use different materials as well as sandbagging, not just sandbags themselves, so pillowcases, anything they can find from local areas. And if you want a second layer of sandbags, do exactly the same thing. Roll out another little sausage of green stuff, stick it on top, press it down, and then just go back again with the knife just to ensure you've got all those sandbags. Now, really, in reality, the soldiers wouldn't probably put sandbags on the top of the front of the trenches because it would be too obvious to an enemy, to the position itself. But this is a representation, and you know what wargamers are like. We just like to have things that aren't particularly real but look nice on the table, and these certainly will do. And then after this effort, you should end up with something that looks a little bit like this. And the next stage is painting the sandbags themselves. So this will take about 24 hours to cure, the green stuff, so make sure it is completely dry before you start this, because you could make quite a mess. But using khaki paint, again, you can use whatever colours you want for the particular theatre, for the particular date that you're using, and just paint the sandbags. Just go around, try to be as neat as possible, try not to get any paint on the rest of the trench if you can avoid it. The reason I use khaki is because if that did happen, it wouldn't matter so much, because I've already dry brushed the trenches anyway in khaki, so it'll just blend in anyway. So again, as I say, just work your way around those sandbags themselves. Just ensure you get into all the nooks and crannies where you've cut those lines, and then you should end up with something like this. Now the sandbags are looking pretty flat and uninteresting at this point, so what I do is I take some Agrax Earthshade by Citadel Miniatures, and I just paint this liberally all over those sandbags. This is a slightly lighter tone than the strong tone by Army Painter, but you can use whatever wash you want. Just make sure that you get into all those lines in between the sandbags, because this is going to give you that real nice depth of tone when these are sitting on the tabletop. Once your Agrax has dried, I go back again with khaki and do another dry brush over the top of the sandbags as well. Again, just to give you that little bit of a highlight against the dark shadow of the wash. An almost final stage now is just to make sure you varnish these, because they're going to be used in games. I use spray varnish because it's quick and easy and it's good stuff. Just completely cover them, ensure that they are completely and utterly sealed and they won't get damaged during a game. Now, if you really wanted, you could just leave them as they are. They're perfectly fine for this. But what I like to do is I like to merge my terrain into the board itself. So using some undiluted PVA glue, I'll go around with a big brush around the bottom and just add static grass to the base of these. So it just makes them helps them look a bit different on the table. You don't have the line where the actual model meets the tabletop and a big line around it. Simply sprinkle your static grass around the edges there just to create a small tide line. I wanted to leave some of the brown up because that's the fresh earth that has been dug up for these trenches. So it's just, like I say, just a case of working your way around. That's why I've got the cloth down there so I can collect any of the static grass that falls off. The last thing to do is add some random blobs of PVA glue on the soil itself, and then just add some bits of scatter just to break up the shape of the front so they're not as obvious as they were previously. And that's them pretty much done. And here they are on the table. As you can see, they merge in pretty well with the cloth that I have, and also they fit several figures in there. You can make these as big or as small as you like. As I say, you can make them 28mm, 15mm, 6mm, whichever scale you're using. But thank you for watching. I hope you enjoyed this tutorial.